Hello, everybody. This is a little mini episode, kind of bonus content outside of our normal routine. And that is because it's all about James Jimmy Gilbert, who was a BBC producer of some note throughout the 60s and 70s and even the 80s. He had a very long and illustrious career, both as a producer, director, and as a studio exec for the BBC and Thames TV. I did a big deep dive on him. We put it into our episode talking about Spanners 11, because he was also a producer of that. And it was just too long. I talked about this for half an hour, but I thought it was very interesting, and particularly for big proper sitcom nerds, I didn't want to just get lost in another episode, so we're putting it out as a separate thing. I'm doing this little intro just because we're going straight into it with no kind of preamble or anything like that. So thank you very much. This one's for the real sitcom nerds, and enjoy.
Now, you said when we were preparing for this, you said you'd got, well, I'll tell the listeners what you said. You said, I've got some stuff to talk about the producer, James Gilbert, but, I've got a lot to talk about. It might go on a bit. so yes. Me having really whet the listeners' appetite. Go for it.
So yeah, let's do this at the end. And if anybody wants to bail out, they can. But I might drone on a bit with this. But this was fascinating to me. So basically, James Gilbert, or Jimmy Gilbert as he was known, is credited here on 7 of 1 as the executive producer. Now, you don't often see executive producers credited on these sorts of shows on the BBC at this time. But I think that is because he was the overarching producer of the whole series. And each episode had its own producer-director, Harold Snoad in this case, for example. And so that is why he's been credited as executive producer there. But Jimmy Gilbert was also the producer-director of Last of the Summer Wine, Series 1, as we watched in this case. And so I wanted to do a bit more of a deep dive on him. I thought I'll look into it. And I ended up finding an interview with Jimmy Gilbert in 1990, and it was part of the British Entertainment History Project, a sort of an oral history, basically interviewing people from in the industry, not necessarily particularly famous names or actors or anything, but like people behind the scenes. So I got a lot, and this was about 7 hours long, right? I'm not messing about. This was
I was going to ask that because I think with if you think about, I don't know, somebody's on a podcast or on a TV show promoting something, they're going to talk about the thing. Yeah. When it's an oral history, you're going to get like, now tell me about this, like a chronicle. Tell me about this, and then what happened there?
Exactly. Yeah, it's not obviously not designed to be kind of entertaining. It's just kind of, although he's telling stories, it's relatively entertaining.
Sure.
And the guy who's interviewing him is obviously someone in the industry as well, because they say, "Oh, did you work with so and so?" And like he knows what he's talking about. Sounds like Roy Plumley, that kind of BBC voice. But this was 1990, so Jimmy Gilbert by that point was pretty much retired. He was born in 1923, and I'll come back onto kind of his career a bit. But basically what I'm going to talk about now is all the stuff I learned from listening to this interview. It's not just stuff about Jimmy Gilbert, but interesting little contextual things about the industry, which I found really fascinating. Okay. But first of all, Gilbert himself, born and raised in Edinburgh, always sort of interested in the world of entertainment, loved watching films and music hall and all that sort of thing. Was interested in being a director, didn't really know what that meant. But born in 23, so obviously he ends up going in the Second World War. He ends up joins the RAF, trained in America and kind of was in Florida, but made a special effort to pilgrimage to Hollywood because he was so kind of invested in the entertainment industry and all that sort of thing. So he trained in America, came back to Scotland, and basically spent out his time in the war doing coastal patrols around Scotland and Norway, like much to his own relief. Like he never saw any sort of serious action. Decided he wanted to get into show business. Someone said to him, "Look, if you want to be a director, you should train as an actor, because then you know how it works from the other side, right? And it's kind of an easier way in." He didn't have any connections. He wasn't a BBC guy. He didn't go to Oxford University. Wherever that is. So he joined RADA after the war. Now, here's an interesting kind of, we've talked about a lot of people, a lot of actors who went through RADA about this time period. And really interesting what James Gilbert said was that at that time, if you had even a sniff of a service record, they'd let you in. You had a grant to get education after serving in the military. And they just basically they would take you. And by his own admission, he was never much of an actor. He was never much of a talented actor. But here's the thing he also said about that time period in terms of RADA. He said that what they were used to getting were girls who were using it as a finishing school. So it's just kind of get your voice nice and and stand upright and all that sort of thing. And what his phrase, effete boys who were straight out of school. So just by virtue of being a few years older, you've been out and lived a life, you've gone and served in the military and all that. It just was something a bit different and kind of so they were just grabbing everyone and he also said, and this is another interesting thing which I'd never really thought of, but makes a lot of sense. All these people, not just necessarily people who'd served in the military, but who had lived through the war years. He said, like, these were young people who were hungry. We'd lost 5 years of our lives, of our youth. We were like, had that drive to achieve things,
do something.
But here's the thing: he said by his own admission, never much of an actor, but he was a pretty good musician. His mum taught him how to play piano, and so he could do music and he could write music. And that was kind of where he found his niche. So he was working in Glasgow and basically doing pantos and musical reviews and stuff like that. Worked with a young Stanley Baxter at that time. So that was kind of how he got his in. And then in the early 50s, BBC Scotland was established. And so he started doing a little bit of work for them. Still interested in directing. So at this point, he married a fellow actor and they had a child. And then they kind of made this very brave and difficult decision to move to London, like get down to that London and kind of try and make it there. And not making a good living. Although they said, like, this is another contextual thing at the time. They said they weren't making much of a living, just scraping by. But then they bought a 7-bedroom house in Richmond. Right,
just scraping by.
Which, to be fair, they sort of had to borrow the money, and they lived on one floor and rented out all the other rooms. Like, it was an investment. And even that, at one point, it was bad enough that his wife and the kids went back up to Scotland to stay on the family farm where she came from, so that they could rent out where they were living as well, because they literally couldn't afford to live there. So they were scraping by, but anyway. Around this time, he co-wrote a musical called Grab Me a Gondola. Remember that?
Okay.
No. But he and another writer, they wrote this and it became a big success. It was the big breakthrough. That
a musical, stage musical or TV?
Yes, stage musical. Yeah, he was only working in stage at this time. And they kind of managed to scrape together and got an investor to make it happen. And then it ended up being a big success, ended up running on the West End for a couple of years. And just to put that into context, at the time this was happening, he was working in a biscuit factory, like just to make ends meet, and then doing this, waiting for this thing to take off. He was applying to get into the BBC's director training program and not getting anywhere. And then just while they were still making Grab Me a Gondola, before it had become a success, the investor, who was kind of a well-known kind of actor and producer of the time, he mentioned to this guy, I'm trying to get into the BBC's director program. And he was like, I'll get you in there. I've got a few connections. I'll make a phone call. So like he'd been like knocking on this door for 5 years. And then it was just met the right person who went, I'll put in a good word for you. So he got into the director training program like the week before the musical opened, which then became a huge success.
Brilliant.
So it's interesting, like everything sort of happened at once, but I wonder if he hadn't got into the director training program, but it had this big success, would he have just continued writing musicals and kind of found his success there? Because what he did was end up spending his career at the BBC. Yeah. So I don't know. He obviously chose the sort of like slightly more secure route, but suddenly had an income and a proper bit of success behind him. So didn't have to worry about money anymore. Yeah. Because of his background in music and stuff. One of his first jobs was in music television, sort of the equivalent of Top of the Pops, like producing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, okay.
This is 1957 we're talking about. So
before Top of the Pops.
It's before Top of the Pops, yeah. And then he was given a brief to create some sort of comedy musical review show because of his background in that area. And apparently this hadn't been done on the TV before. This is late 50s. Okay. No one had done like sketch show.
Is that what you mean, like a sort of Saturday night shiny floor show? Like that sort
sketch
of thing,
show, but a little bit more musical. So it's like it's Two Ronnies, really. You know, do a couple of songs.
Yeah, that's sketches, what I meant. Yeah.
Basically, yeah. And he created a show, and he brought Stanley Baxter down to do it. It was Stanley Baxter's first ever TV appearance, who went on to become quite a big lead star in his own right.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was a big success. So his next project after that was The Frost Report.
Right, okay.
So now we're into the sort of 1960s, 1960 actually, and it was like, right, sketch comedy, that's what you're doing, that's what we're doing now. Working with David Frost, brought in Marty Feldman, you got Tony Jay, they were writers. Frost brought in John Cleese and Ronnie Corbett he'd worked with before. Jimmy Gilbert brought in Ronnie Barker because he'd worked with him on the radio. You know, all the Python lot, they were writers. You know, it's basically that nexus of satire. And worth noting here, perhaps an organic plug here for our Patreon episode, which will come up next week.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us a plug?
Yeah, so we in the Patreon episode next week, we're going to cover The Rise and Rise of Michael Rimmer, which is a satirical film from 1970 starring Peter Cook. And a lot of the names you just listed there also appear in it. And it's also got Michael Bates in it from Last of the Summer Wine. Hence, that's the tenuous link with our Last of the Summer Wine. But yeah, we'll be covering that on our Patreon special. So patreon.com/BritComPod. If you want to sign up for that, for just £5 a month, you can get access to our extra bonus, double plus good episodes.
Yes, that's next week. We're doing Rise and Rise of Michael Rimmer, which I've got a feeling, Gareth, that's going to be our longest episode ever because there's so much history stuff that I know you're going to talk about, and there's loads of actors in it I'm going to talk about.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah,
but yeah, so Jimmy Gilbert was sort of central to a lot of that. He produced the Cook Report. He produced Not Only But Also, which was the Peter Cook and Dudley Moore's big TV breakthrough. He was right there in the nexus of all that. In the 60s, the BBC boom.
Right.
And in fact, another contextual thing he mentioned, like he was saying in the 60s at the BBC, it was the boom years. Budgets were like, everyone was buying a TV and buying a TV license.
Sure.
Budgets were going up 10% every year. It was like absolutely boomtown. You could do anything. Here's some money, make it happen. So, and he's telling this story from like 25 years ahead with some nostalgia and resentment that it didn't last. Like the good old days kind of thing.
The good old days. But I think people nowadays, BBC producers nowadays, would talk about the 90s as the good old days, wouldn't they?
He also mentioned, and this is something we talk about a lot, so I thought it was worth bringing up, tape retention, or rather lack of, at the BBC. So many things from that time period just got wiped. They wiped the tapes and reused them.
Yeah.
And so Jimmy Gilbert was talking about this with some resentment that this happened. And he was essentially saying, as a producer and then later as an executive at the BBC, he was dead against it. He tried to save things. But someone would come in with a big list of things saying, here's what we've got. We need to get rid of 90% of it. What do you want to keep? And so he would have to kind of say, he said his general policy, he would keep like the first and last episode of a series and then wipe the rest. That seemed to be his way of dealing with that. But he also he like in the sort of typical BBC way, he did give us balance, and he said, where are they going to keep these tapes? You'd need a huge library of a warehouse just to keep
massive
them.
Warehouse, and
they degrade, so you have to keep them in very specialized conditions. And it's, you can't just digitize them and put them on a hard drive of hits like I do.
It's all well and good that nowadays you could do that, couldn't you? But
I do it.
Yeah, not for the first 40 or 50 years.
I've got 21 terabytes, mate. Well, imagine what that would look like on tape. Yeah. So I think we have to sort of take that into mind when we moan about the BBC, don't we? It just wasn't practical really at the time. So there was a position at the BBC called Head of Comedy. This position was only created in 1970. Before that, you had...
Are you going to tell me that Jimmy Gilbert was the first one?
Not quite, but he was the second one. But so you had the head of light entertainment and head of variety. And so sketch and comedy and review fell under variety. Light entertainment, you know. And so because of sitcoms in the 60s becoming a thing, they had to create the head of comedy. Head of light entertainment was then, I think, if I've got this right, the hierarchy. Head of light entertainment was like the boss of head of comedy, head of variety. And so, Jimmy Gilbert became.
So variety would have been those Two Ronnies. Would that have been variety? You know, rather than comedy, those sorts of shows.
I think so. What exactly?
Well, I'm not trying to put you on the spot there, but those Sunday night shows would have been variety, whereas the sitcoms are comedy.
Well, I mean, one of the things he said was that variety doesn't exist. Like, they still call it head of variety, but that's not really a thing. And
it's not a thing. Yeah.
All the times he refers to what I would call sketch comedy, he always calls review. Like in the kind of a very kind of Cambridge Footlights kind of way. So like the terminologies have changed slightly. So it's difficult to necessarily know exactly what falls under what genre, I guess. But yeah. So he became head of comedy in 1973. And that is important because that is right the time period where we're talking about in this month. The series of Last of the Summer Wine that he did was basically his last work as a producer-director for the BBC.
Before he moved into
and he moved upstairs into an executive position. He did that for 3.5 years, and then he moved up to head of light entertainment and did that for 4 years. After that, he was headhunted by Thames, and he went over to Thames TV, and so spent the last 10 years. Several years of his career there as the head of comedy at Thames. And then just the tail end of his career, he did a little bit more freelancing, kind of producing, directing, back to actually kind of on the set kind of thing. And just judging from the way he tells it, he did eventually step up into that executive position. He'd been offered it before, didn't want to do it. The sort of time was right. And in fact, he said he'd just done Last of the Summer Wine. He'd just directed Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads. And so he felt like the time was right. It was, I'm getting promoted because I'm doing well, as opposed to, like the time is right to step away, go out on a high kind of thing. So, and then, like I said, he became head of light entertainment. And, he tells, like, it was a difficult job from what he tells. Like, it was all meetings, but you have to be on top of everything that's going on. And it was not a downturn at the BBC, but like those 60 glory years were over. And so as he was there, the budgets were getting less and less, and he sort of... But also
the growth was slowing.
His job got bigger and bigger. When he moved to Thames, he basically said, like, the number of people under me kind of shrank from 150 to 40. And I knew everyone. I met them in the canteen. I could talk to them. And it was like he said, it was like going back to the old BBC, and he really loved it again.
Yes.
So I think it's one of those things, the bureaucracy gets so big and you lose track of what you're doing within it. So talking about Last of the Summer Wine specifically, he says when he read the very first script that came through, the characters were in their 70s. And he said the only thing that really brought them together was their mutual loneliness. And so it was actually James Gilbert who suggested make them a bit younger, and kind of it makes them a bit more sympathetic, because otherwise you're asking the audience to laugh at these lonely old men, and it's a bit sad and kind of pathetic. So he suggested aging them down, which obviously they did. And he also referred to Norman Clegg, the character played by Peter Sallis, as Roy Clark's soapbox, which I found an interesting description.
His barroom philosophy was Roy Clark's outlet.
Yes. He said that everybody hated the title, apart from him and Roy Clark.
It is a rubbish title.
Everyone else hated it, including the actors. They said, no one's going to watch this. It's stupid. They're not going to remember what it is. And he also said they shot it in Home Firth. Apparently, that was Barry Tuck's suggestion. He'd worked in Home Firth. He said that's a good place to go. You'll get all the views you need. But Roy Clark, apparently, when he wrote the script, he'd imagined it set in the slums of Rotherham.
Okay, because we talked about that sort of post-industrial type vibe, didn't we? Mm-hmm. Even though it was in this beautiful location.
Yeah,
I can see those characters working in. It'd be a very different show, but the basic setup of the characters would work in a old mining town.
Yeah, I'm sure it would work still, but yeah, I think, and also Jimmy Gilbert.
Not sure it would have lasted 37 years. I think the location is part of that longevity.
I think there's a sense of timelessness about it, isn't it? It's kind of lost in time there, isn't it? Yeah. But interestingly, Gilbert himself had just directed a film in Australia starring Harry Sitcom, which, from what I could tell, he just did because he always wanted to direct a film. So he says, like, yeah, okay, I'm going to do it. Take a few months off his job at the BBC, because this is when he was still a producer director. So it's kind of, you're just doing job by job. Here you've got a 3-month job on Whatever Happened to the Like Lads. Now you've got a 3-month job on Last of the Summer Wine. So he took a few months out, made this film, but because of that, he'd been shooting on film, on location, and so he wanted to do more of that. He wanted to get out of the studio. He noted, interestingly, that that's something the BBC could afford to do, whereas ITV at that time couldn't. ITV sitcoms, and we've seen them, they're stuck in the studio. Whereas the BBC, let's get out and shoot a few location shoots, because it's just expensive. But he really embraced that with Last of the Summer Wine, as we saw.
As we saw, a lot of it is outdoors, and I think Home Firth is a character in that drama,
Yeah, very much so. So just to go back to the early 70s again, this time period we're looking at, Jimmy Gilbert is a producer-director at the BBC, and he is given responsibility for the Two Ronnies. Or rather, Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett come to the BBC, and they're contracted to the BBC now, and so Jimmy Gilbert has responsibility for, right, what do we do with them? And together they come up with the Two Ronnies. Him and Ronnie Barker basically sat down and hashed that all out. What is this? Here's characters you've done over here. We can bring them in. Here's something you've done over here. Here's some new material I've got these writers. Ronnie Corbett less involved, apparently, but
Ronnie Corbett,
we established that, didn't we?
More of a comedic actor, not a writer or producer.
So the other thing he had responsibility for was finding sitcoms for Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett. That was part of their deal, that they would have their own projects.
I see.
Now, we covered Sorry in some detail on this series, and that took a long time to get to that. There was quite a few other things.
I was going to say that was that early 80s, late 70s?
Yeah, early 80s. Yeah, it certainly wasn't 80s. Jimmy Gilbert's by then. But there was a couple of the Ronnie Corbett sitcoms in that period that just didn't quite take off.
I remember.
And with Ronnie Barker, what they did was they commissioned and produced 7 of 1. Mm-hmm. So this 7 of 1 that we're looking at today was James Gilbert trying to find sitcoms for Ronnie Barker, and it worked.
Yeah, it worked.
Yes, it did.
And how? Yeah.
Here's another interesting thing he said regarding something like 7 of 1, and this makes sense really. Making pilots, making like 7 episodes of different shows, is much more expensive than making a series with just one lot of sets, one writer, one set of actors. And so this is a big investment doing this sort of thing. And you've got someone like Ronnie Barker, it's worth doing, or the Comedy Playhouse series they would do, because the payoff is it's a pilot series and you'll get sitcoms out of it. But it was a lot more expensive, as again, it meant that it was something the BBC could do and the ITV were less able to do because they didn't have the same money. But he said it encouraged them to be more strict with script pilots. So instead of putting money into like, let's make a pilot episode, he put money into the writers. So he would give a writer like a stipend, or like, you write something for me. And that meant you could work out the kinks of it before going into production.
So we'd like put them on salary sort of thing.
Yes. And he also said that the relationship between BBC TV and BBC Radio was not as strong as you might think it is. And we talk a lot about radio shows being transferred to TV, and our radio was a breeding ground for TV, and certainly it is. but it wasn't a really set up that way. And so James Gilbert, as head of comedy or head of light entertainment, he decided, I'm going to work with radio. And through the TV budget, they paid for 4 writers a year to be on contract for 12 months for radio.
For the radio.
Produce things for radio. We will get the benefit later. We know that. So it's worth it.
That's interesting. That's really interesting.
And also, he said, I got the numbers here somewhere. He said, and he's talking about 1990 when he was doing this interview. He said a pilot right now will cost about £100,000 to produce a pilot of a TV show. A radio pilot of the same script will cost £1,000, like literally 1% of the cost. And so that it makes perfect sense. Like, make it on the radio first.
If you're investing in writers, it's a relatively low investment, isn't it? It's potentially a really great return. That makes sense.
Exactly. And he said they also did this. They ended up doing the same thing. They would pay for a producer in radio, just for someone to get the training. Basically, it's like sending someone out on loan, you know.
Yeah.
But
it's exactly what it is, Alan. We are talking about football. That's exactly what it is.
Get some experience. But here's just again talking about the radio connection. So the radio had picked up To the Manor Born.
Yeah.
And they were going to make a BBC radio version of To the Manor Born. This was before it was on TV. They'd cast Penelope Keith. John Lloyd, a young producer by the name of John Lloyd.
BBC radio producer, yeah.
Yeah, he was producing it. But somewhere along the line, the TV people said, this is a good concept. We'll have this. Yeah, we'll take it. Do your radio series and then we'll take it. But Penelope Keith's people heard about this and they basically went, look, if you're going to do it with TV, let's do it for TV. Let's not mess about with radio. If you're going to do it, let's do it. So that's what happened. And we got To the Manor Born.
Okay.
But that meant that he's basically stolen this from the radio people.
From John Lloyd?
From John Lloyd. And so John Lloyd came to him and said, look, you've nicked my show. Why don't you give me a job? And so he went, all right. So he gave John Lloyd a position in TV and he said to him, look, I want some sort of review show, a review comedy thing. Also, I'm looking for something with Rowan Atkinson. Make that happen.
9 o'clock news.
Not the 9 o'clock news is what we got from that.
So it's not the 9 o'clock news, light entertainment, not comedy. It's review, isn't it?
Light entertainment sits above both anyway, so.
Okay. Never mind. Sorry, carry on.
It's hard to tell, but it should be, that's a review. It's a sketch show, isn't it, right? He was also talking about how back then you were much more likely to get a second series. If something wasn't quite working that well, they would still give it a second series. And as much as that is like, give it a chance, there's also a financial element to that. He said when he was at Thames, he had to create, was it 12 comedy series a year? Basically, that was his brief. 12 comedy series a year. Obviously, if you've already got 6, that's great. You just go, recommission that.
We just need to find 6 new ideas.
You've got to create new ones every year. That costs money and, creative energy. So here's him talking about an example of a TV show that didn't do very well in the first series, but they decided to give it another go.
Okay.
There was a lovely series which we liked enormously called The Other One, written by John Esmond and Bob Larby with Michael Gambon and Richard Bryars, which the producer and myself and other people at Television Centre loved. The public didn't like it, and we thought, well, we'll give it another go, give it another series, worth another series. And we were totally wrong, because the second series, it went down even further. In fact, it just went out the plug hole the other end. So however much we liked it, there was no flying in the face of the audience. They didn't, and so we took it off.
Interesting.
There you go. And just to give
I remember when we talked about the other one, we've covered that on the podcast, and listeners can go back and listen to that. The two series was very different in tone and location and everything.
But I think I was like, let's try and kick it up the arse.
Let's try something different.
Yeah. So to give the obverse of that, the interviewer asked him, was there anything the opposite where you guys didn't really like it, but the audience did, so you just kept going with
that's
it.
an interesting question.
And apparently the answer is, are you being served? So as we talked about when we did Are You Being Served, the first series didn't do that well, and so they were basically, everyone was saying, oh, get it off. And it was David Croft who kind of fought for it. But here's another clip for you.
When David Croft came in and said he wanted to do more Are You Being Served, and he couldn't understand why it was being taken off, etc. And I said, well, go along with you on that. Yes, let's do another series of it. And there was a lot of resistance within the BBC about Are You Being Served. They felt this was a very vulgar, very non-BBC comedy series. And even within the department itself, they didn't like, a lot of them really didn't like it at all, and never liked it. But it was worth having another go at it, and it became a huge success, absolute smash success.
That's interesting, isn't it? I tell you, one other thing, I'm not sure if this is how highbrow this is, but that is a cracking BBC Scottish accent. There is like 3% Scottish accent there. He has had that hammered out of him in the BBC.
Of course, he went to RADA as well, so they would have knocked that out even before he was at the BBC. Yeah.
But just about hear
it. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And he also mentioned something called the Audience Appreciation Index, which he just threw out there like it was a regular thing. Everyone knows what that is. I don't need to explain it.
I haven't heard of that, Alan, so educate me.
I haven't. Well, I can assume what it is, the Audience Appreciation Index, but it's a way of garnering how the audience is responding to the show, right? However they do that, probably through polls, sort of Michael Rimmer style polling. And
next week,
what he said was I found very interesting. He said people always responded better to things they already knew. They're familiar with the characters. So there was an inherent bias towards established shows. So even if viewer ratings went down, appreciation index might go up because the people who are staying around are the ones who like it.
Loved it. Yeah.
And so it said you couldn't just rely on that. And his job as a head of comedy was to preempt when a show had kind of run its course and outstayed its welcome, rather than just kicking it into to its death. And so
a show could be doing quite well in terms of numbers because there's nothing else to watch, but people are just like, oh god, this is crap, this is boring.
Yeah. Or people might really respond well to it, but not enough of them. So it's kind of not, that's So that was interesting. Lots of interesting insights into this.
In opinion polling, Alan, they call that salience. So ask someone a binary question: do you want to leave or stay in the European Union? And you get a vote. But if you'd have asked people that 5 years earlier, the vast majority of people would have said, I don't care.
Yeah.
It's salience. It only becomes important when it becomes important.
Yeah. Well, we'll see all more about polling.
We might talk a bit more about opinion polls next week.
It was a big deal in the 70s.
Shall we better wrap this up because that was fascinating. And those listeners that are still with us will have found that fascinating because that was really, that sounds really insightful for our sitcom historians.
Well, I tell you what, let me just wrap this up by just tailing off Jimmy Gilbert's career. Like I say, he went to Thames TV and was head of comedy there. So let me just throw a few things at you that he commissioned while he was there. Fizz, which we talked about because it was written by the people who did...
Is that the two characters from Chance in a Million?
Yeah. Fresh Fields, he did.
Yeah. Julia, what's her name? Julia, help me. Anton Rogers and Julia.
Anton Rogers and so and so.
The other one. Sorry, go on, carry on.
A show called Man's Best Friend, which was
that rings a bell. What's that?
It was written by Roy Clark, but it's got Fulton Mackay in it.
That's right. We talked about that when we did Porridge. Yes.
So Thames TV made that, but it was actually made for Channel 4 as part of a deal they had there. Right. He stepped in as a director on French Fields, which was kind of the continuation of Fresh Fields.
Yeah.
He was a director for that because the director was ill, and so he came and kind of stood in last minute. But at that point, he hadn't directed for 20 years.
Yeah, a long time. Yeah.
And then his last credit, as far as I can tell on IMDb, was a show called Ain't Misbehaving, which ran for one series, and it was written.
What's that?
It was written by Roy Clark in 1994, but it wasn't particularly a big success or anything. I don't think.
Who was it?
Well, I can't remember. I didn't write that down.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It rings a bell, but it might just be the song that I'm thinking of. I don't know.
Yeah. And then sort of mid-90s, he would have been, 70 years old by then. I think he just retired. He lived for quite a long time after that, but in nice, quiet, quite a well-off retirement, I'm sure. BBC pension.
Well, that's really good. That's really interesting. So that archive that you found, where is that? If our listeners were really interested, where could they find that?
Yes, there is a website. I think probably the best thing to do is to search for British Entertainment History Project. That seems to be kind of what it's labelled under. I can't remember.
We can put a link to that interview in on our socials when this episode goes out, and then people can listen to all 7 hours if they want, but they can do whatever they like.
It was very fascinating. I
think
not just for the Jimmy Gilbert stuff, but also the kind of contextual stuff, which I think will pay off later on as we're talking about other things. And that's it. A bit of an abrupt ending. Like I said, this whole chunk was taken out of another episode, so it wasn't really supposed to be its own thing, but it was all a bit too long and detailed. I wanted it to have its own little life. So thank you so much for all those of you who stuck with us. I think that's really interesting. I think we're going to be calling back onto a lot of that information in future as well. If you like bonus content, do support us on Patreon, because that's where you will get exclusive content that you can't get out here on the public, on the YouTubes or anything like that. Patreon.com/BritcomPod. Just £5 a month. You will help us spread the sitcom love, as well as getting all that extra content. So thank you very much, and we will see you next time.